A man missed his flight to help an elderly woman. Unaware the woman was the airline's owner. "No, please, the interview. It was my only shot," Ethan pleaded, his voice strained as he watched the jet bridge pull away. The gate agent offered a curt, "Sorry, sir, flight's closed. Next one's tomorrow, with fees." What seemed like disaster was just the beginning of an incredible journey. Want to hear how this moment of despair turned into a life-changing opportunity? Subscribe to our channel, give this story a like, and listen to the full episode to discover how a missed flight led to an unexpected destiny. The scream was swallowed by the sudden, concussive thump that resonated through the steel and glass of Terminal 4. Head snapped up. A wave of silence, sharp and cold, rippled through the chattering lines at gate D17, then D19, then all the way down the concourse. Outside, on the rain-slicked tarmac, a ground service vehicle lay on its side, steam or smoke hissing from its undercarriage, its hazard lights blinking erratically like a dying insect. Near it, sprawled unervingly still, was a figure in high-visibility orange. Airport personnel were sprinting, their shouts lost to the thick windows. Inside, a collective gasp, then a cacophony of panicked questions erupted. Phones were instantly raised, not for calls, but for videos. A child, startled by the shift in atmosphere, began to wail, a thin, piercing sound that cut through the rising tide of adult fear. Another thump, closer this time, felt more than heard, a heavy, metallic groan from somewhere deep within the airport's infrastructure. The lights flickered, held, then flickered again, casting the scene in strobing, unsettling flashes. A voice, tinny and strained, crackled over the PA system. "Attention. Attention in the terminal. We are experiencing a temporary operational issue. Please remain calm." But the tremor that ran through the floor, subtle yet undeniable, suggested something far more significant than an operational issue. A fine dust, dislodged from the ceiling tiles, began to drift down like a macabre snowfall. The air, moments before smelling of jet fuel and stale coffee, now carried a faint, acrid scent of burnt electronics. Passengers, moments ago preoccupied with departure times and lukewarm lattes, were now wide-eyed, their faces pale masks of dawning terror. The unspoken question hung heavy. What was happening? And then, the emergency shutters, thick steel curtains, began their deafening, inexorable descent over the massive terminal windows, plunging the concourse into a dim, artificial twilight, sealing them in with whatever was unfolding. Before the metallic groans and falling dust, Ethan Brooks' world was one of quiet desperation, played out in the monotonous rhythm of job applications and dwindling savings. At 34, his hands, usually adept at coaxing life back into failing engines, were more often found scrubbing grease for beneath his fingernails after a few hours' work at a local garage, a temporary gig that barely kept the lights on in his cramped ST. Lewis' studio apartment. He was an aeronautical engineer by training, laid off 6 months prior when Skystream Dynamics, his employer of nearly a decade, had abruptly downsized its regional maintenance division. The layoff had been a body blow, not just to his finances, but to his identity. Ethan lived and breathed mechanics. The intricate dance of hydraulics, wiring, and turbines was a language he understood intimately. His small apartment was a testament to this. Shelves crammed with technical manuals, a half-disassembled drone on his kitchen table, and the faint, persistent smell of soldering flux. His ordinary world was a predictable cycle of scanning online job boards, tailoring his resume, and enduring soul-crushingly polite rejection emails. The highlight of his week was the Thursday night call with his younger sister, Sarah, a teacher in Oregon, whose unwavering belief in him was often the only thing that kept the tide of despair at bay. He was methodical and meticulous, qualities that made him an excellent engineer, but also prone to overthinking and bouts of anxiety, especially now that his carefully constructed life plan had disintegrated. He craved the order and precision of the hangar, the satisfaction of a problem diagnosed and solved. What he had instead was the gnawing uncertainty of unemployment and the looming shadow of his next rent payment. This trip to Chicago was, he'd told himself, his last real shot before he'd have to consider something drastic, like selling his grandfather's old tools or moving back in with his parents, a prospect that filled him with a quiet dread. The interview was for a senior technician role at AeroLeap, a burgeoning aerospace innovation company. It wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline, a chance to get back to the work he loved, to rebuild his life. He'd spent his last $100 on the non-refundable plane ticket and a new, but still budget, dress shirt. The airport, with its usual symphony of controlled chaos, the echoing announcements, the rumble of suitcases, the murmur of 1,000 conversations, felt different today. It was a gateway, he hoped, back to relevance. He triple-checked his printed boarding pass, smoothed the wrinkles in his worn chinos, and tried to project an air of calm confidence he was far from feeling. The simmering tension wasn't just the general stress of air travel. It was the weight of his future pressing down on him, making the already stale airport air feel thick and hard to breathe. He clutched his threadbare backpack, containing his resume, his hopes, and a half-eaten granola bar, trying to ignore the churning in his stomach. The earlier commotion, the distant thumps and flickering lights, had been momentarily terrifying, but announcements soon clarified it as a major power surge in a cargo handling area, causing some localized damage and a temporary security footing. Flights were delayed, but still operational. The steel shutters had even been partially raised again, though an air of unease lingered. Ethan, however, was too focused on his own impending departure to dwell on it for long. Ethan's flight to Chicago, already delayed by the morning's electrical scare, was finally boarding at Gate B12. He stood in Zone 4, his heart thrumming a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He mentally rehearsed answers to potential interview questions, trying to push away the image of his dwindling bank balance. As the line shuffled forward, a small commotion near the seating area by the gate caught his attention. An elderly woman, frail and with a cloud of soft white hair, was struggling to her feet, her face etched with distress. She had a cane in one hand and a large floral tote bag in the other, which seemed to be slipping from her grasp. Her knuckles were white as she tried to steady herself. A gate agent, harried and speaking too quickly into her microphone, was making the final boarding call. All rose. All zones for Flight 2351 to Chicago O'Hare. Please proceed to the gate for immediate boarding. The doors will be closing in 5 minutes. The elderly woman, whose name Ethan would later learn was Eleanor Vance, let out a small, flustered cry as her tote bag finally tumbled. Its contents a book, a half-knitted scarf, a pair of glasses, and a small, clear Ziploc bag of medications spilling across the carpet. She swayed, looking overwhelmed and on the verge of tears. Several people glanced over, a flicker of sympathy in their eyes, but the urgency of the final boarding call pulled them forward. No one stopped. Ethan hesitated for only a second. His mind screamed at him, Chicago, the interview, your last chance. He saw the gate agent glance impatiently towards the jet bridge. But then he saw the genuine panic on Mrs. Vance's face, the slight tremor in her hands as she tried to bend down. He pictured his own grandmother, who had often struggled with her mobility in her later years. "Ma'am, let me help you with that," Ethan said, stepping out of the line. He quickly knelt, gathering her scattered belongings. "Oh, Thank you, dear boy, she said, her voice thin and reedy. I'm just all thumbs today. My flight, I think I'm going to miss it. I can't seem to. She gestured vaguely, her eyes darting towards a gate. Which flight are you on? Ethan asked, stuffing the last of her items into the tote. It's the one to Denver. Gate B-19, I think. But I got turned around after that power business earlier. Ethan glanced at the departure board. B-19 was at the other end of the concourse. His own gate agent was now saying, "Final call, Flight 2351 to Chicago. Doors closing." His stomach clenched. This was it. Go now, or miss his flight. He could point her in the right direction, maybe alert a gate agent. But she looked so lost, so vulnerable. He made his decision. "Don't worry, I'll get you there," he said, offering her his arm. "Let's go." He half walked, half rushed Mrs. Vance down the concourse, his own backpack thumping against his spine. He could hear the faint, final echoes of the Chicago flight announcement fading behind him. When they reached B-19, the gate agent was thankfully more patient. Mrs. Vance, fumbling for her ticket, looked up at Ethan, her eyes watery. "You're a lifesaver, young man." Truly. Ethan managed a weak smile. "Glad I could help." He turned and sprinted back towards B-12, a desperate hope flickering in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, they hadn't quite closed the door. But as he skidded to a halt, breathless, he saw the jet bridge already pulling away from the aircraft. The door was firmly shut. "No!" The word escaped him, a strangled cry. The gate agent of B-12, the same one who'd been making the urgent calls, looked at him without a trace of sympathy. "Sorry, sir. Flight's closed. Next available to Chicago isn't until tomorrow morning. There'll be a change fee and fare difference." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Tomorrow morning. The interview was at 10 a.m. today. His one shot. Gone. He sagged against the wall, the adrenaline draining away, leaving him cold and hollow. "I missed it," he whispered, the reality crashing down. He'd just thrown away. A wave of nausea, bitter and sharp, rose in his throat. What had he done? The hours that followed were a blur of frustration and mounting despair. Ethan, still reeling from the finality of the closed aircraft door, approached the airline's customer service desk. The agent, a young man with an air of practiced indifference, listened to Ethan's plea for understanding with a neutral expression. "Sir, airline policy is quite clear regarding boarding times. We can rebook you on the 7:15 a.m. flight tomorrow. The change fee is $75, plus a fare difference of $120. $195. Ethan felt a flush of anger, quickly followed by a cold wave of helplessness. That was money he simply didn't have. His entire travel budget had been poured into the original ticket. "But I was right here at the gate. I was just helping someone." "We appreciate your civic-mindedness, sir," the agent said, his tone suggesting he'd heard every excuse imaginable. But the flight departed on schedule once boarding was complete. "We can't hold aircraft for individual passengers." Defeated, Ethan called Aeroleap. He explained the situation to a polite but firm HR assistant, his voice cracking slightly as he recounted missing the flight. She expressed sympathy, but stated that Mr. Henderson, the hiring manager, had a very tight schedule with back-to-back interviews and an international trip planned for the next day. Rescheduling wouldn't be possible in the immediate future. They would keep his resume on file. It was a gentle but clear dismissal. The bus ride back to his small ST Louis apartment was grim. Each mile felt like it was taking him further away from any semblance of hope. The city lights, usually a comforting backdrop, seemed to mock his failure. He let himself into his silent apartment, the smell of stale coffee and his own anxiety greeting him. He tossed his backpack onto the worn sofa and sank into a kitchen chair, staring at the half-disassembled drone. For the first time in months, he didn't feel any urge to tinker with it. The meticulous work that usually calmed his nerves now felt pointless. He'd gambled his last chance and lost. The what-ifs tormented him. What if he'd just pointed Mrs. Vance to an airport employee? What if he'd run faster? Meanwhile, Eleanor Vance, comfortably settled into her first-class seat on the flight to Denver, was making a call. She wasn't just any elderly woman. She was Eleanor Vance, a retired but still highly influential board member of Summit Air, a well-regarded, employee-focused regional airline headquartered in Denver. She wasn't the CEO, but her opinion carried immense weight, and she held a significant block of shares. She frequently traveled incognito on various airlines, including her own, to get an unvarnished look at the passenger experience and employee conduct. Today, she'd genuinely been flustered after the morning's power surge and the subsequent gate changes, and her slight arthritis had made retrieving her spilled bag a real challenge. "Martha," she said into her phone, her voice now clear and authoritative, "I need you to do a little digging for me. Minneapolis St. Paul Airport today. I was assisted by a young man at Gate B12, who then missed his own flight, United 2351 to Chicago. He was youngish, maybe early 30s, brown hair, wearing a blue shirt and chinos. He mentioned an interview in Chicago. See what you can find out about him. He was exceptionally kind when everyone else just rushed past." Martha, her longtime executive assistant, knew these requests were not unusual and immediately set to work. Eleanor had a knack for finding diamonds in the rough, and her acts of quiet philanthropy and mentorship were legendary within her inner circle. She had a feeling about this young man. His quiet selflessness, even when he clearly had his own pressing concerns, had struck a deep chord. Ethan spent the next 2 days in a fog of dejection. He sent a terse email to his sister, glossing over the details, just saying the interview hadn't worked out. He half-heartedly scrolled through job sites, but the listings seemed more depressing than ever. The world felt gray, his prospects even grayer. He was contemplating calling the local temp agency for manual labor when his phone rang with an unknown Denver area code. "Mr. Ethan Brooks." The voice on the other end was female, calm and professional, with a warm, mature timbre. "Yes, this is he," Ethan replied, a flicker of wary curiosity stirring through his apathy. "Debt collectors? Another rejection? My name is Eleanor Vance. We met briefly at the Minneapolis airport a few days ago. I was the rather clumsy woman you assisted when I spilled my bag near Gate B12. You helped me get to my Denver flight." Ethan sat up a little straighter. "Mrs. Vance? Yes, I remember. Is everything all right?" He felt a pang of guilt, wondering if he'd somehow misplaced something of hers in his haste. "Everything is perfectly fine. Thanks to you, young man," she said, a gentle amusement in her tone. "In fact, I'm calling to express my sincere gratitude. I understand you missed your own flight to Chicago as a result of helping me. I feel dreadful about that." Ethan's throat tightened. "Oh, it was nothing, really. I hope you got to Denver without further trouble." He tried to sound nonchalant, but the missed interview still stung sharply. "I did, thank you. Ethan, I'd very much like to compensate you for your missed flight and any inconvenience it caused. More than that, I'd like to talk with you. Would you be open to meeting? I'm back in Denver, but perhaps we could arrange a video call, or if you're ever this way." He hesitated. Part of him, the cynical, beaten-down part, whispered that this was too good to be true. But her voice sounded genuine, kind. And what did he have to lose? "A video call would be fine, Mrs. Vance. I appreciate you reaching out." They scheduled a call for the following afternoon. Ethan spent the morning tidying his small apartment, more out of nervous habit than any expectation misses. Vance would see more than his face on screen. He put on a clean shirt, the one he'd bought for the Chicago interview. When the video call connected, Eleanor Vance appeared on a screen. She was in what looked like a comfortable, sunlit study, bookshelves lining the wall behind her. She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Ethan, so good to see you properly. As I said, I wanted to thank you. I also had my assistant do a little research, with your permission obtained through the airline manifest after you helped me, of course." Ethan nodded, a little unnerved. "She informed me that you're an aeronautical engineer and that the interview in Chicago was quite important to you. She also discovered, and please forgive the intrusion, that you were laid off from Skystream Dynamics. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am, it is." Eleanor's expression softened. "Ethan, what you did for me, a complete stranger at significant personal cost, speaks volumes about your character. In my long career, I've found that skills can be taught, but integrity and kindness are ingrained. My family founded Summit Air many years ago. While I'm retired from the day-to-day now, I still take a keen interest in finding exceptional people." Ethan stared at the screen, his mind racing. Summit Air? He knew the airline. They had a stellar reputation for maintenance and customer service, a smaller, more agile player compared to the giants, but highly respected. "I was at the airport that day because I often like to see how things are operating on the ground, without any fanfare," Eleanor continued. "It helps me keep a pulse on the industry. You didn't just help an old lady. You helped someone who deeply values the kind of person you are." She paused, then said, "Ethan, this might seem unorthodox, but I believe opportunities arise in unexpected ways. Summit Air is currently looking to expand its operational efficiency team, particularly focusing on integrating newer diagnostic technologies into our maintenance protocols. Your background in aeronautical engineering, especially if you have any experience with newer systems, could be very relevant. Would you be willing to discuss a potential role with our VP of Operations? I've already spoken to him about you." Ethan was stunned into silence. A job? At Summit Air? Because he'd helped her pick up a knitting bag? It felt surreal. This wasn't just compensation for a missed flight. This was a lifeline, a potential career-altering moment. He thought of his empty bank account, the rejection from Aero Leap, the gnawing despair of the past few days. "Mrs. Vance," he finally managed, his voice thick with emotion, I don't know what to say." Yes, I would be very interested in discussing that." A warm smile spread across Eleanor's face. "Excellent. I had a feeling you might be." This was it. The point of no return had been the moment he stepped out of that boarding line. He hadn't known it then, but that single act of kindness had, against all odds, opened a new door, one he hadn't even known existed. He felt a surge of adrenaline, not of panic this time, but of cautious, burgeoning hope. The days following the call with Eleanor Vance felt like walking out of a long, dark tunnel into sudden, almost blinding sunlight. True to her word, Eleanor's assistant, Martha, arranged a video conference with Mr. David Riley, Summit Air's Vice President of Operations. Ethan spent 2 frantic days preparing. He unearthed his old Skystream projects, focusing on the diagnostic systems he'd helped implement. He researched Summit Air's fleet, their routes, their public statements on innovation and safety. He even bought a new tie, a small investment that felt hugely significant. The interview with Riley was rigorous. Riley was a no-nonsense, seasoned aviation professional, his questions sharp and insightful. He didn't mention Eleanor's intervention directly, but focused purely on Ethan's technical expertise, his problem-solving approaches, and his vision for improving maintenance efficiency. Ethan, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and genuine enthusiasm for the subject matter, found himself speaking with a confidence he hadn't felt in months. He talked about predictive maintenance algorithms he'd studied, about streamlining data flow from onboard sensors to ground crews, and about the importance of a proactive, rather than reactive, maintenance culture. A week later, an official offer letter arrived via email. Senior Analyst, Operational Efficiency, Summit Air, based in Denver. The salary was more than he'd made at Skystream, with full benefits and a relocation package. Ethan read it 3 times, then called his sister, Sarah, his voice trembling. For the first time in a long time, they cried together, but this time they were tears of joy and relief. The move to Denver was a whirlwind. Summit Air's relocation team was incredibly efficient, and Ethan found a small apartment not far from their corporate campus, which was adjacent to Denver International Airport. His new world was one of sleek, modern office buildings, the constant, reassuring roar of jet engines, and the focused energy of people passionate about aviation. His initial role involved working with a team to analyze Summit's current maintenance procedures, identify bottlenecks, and propose technological upgrades. It wasn't a management position straight away, but a chance to learn Summit's specific systems and prove his worth from the ground up. Eleanor, he learned, had specifically suggested he start in a role where his technical skills could shine immediately, allowing him to build credibility organically. She met with him for coffee once he was settled, not as a benefactor, but as a mentor offering quiet advice and encouragement. Focus on the work, Ethan, she'd said. Be curious, be thorough, and treat everyone with respect. The rest will follow. The main challenge wasn't the technical aspect of the job. Ethan thrived on that, but the subtle undercurrents of office dynamics. Some colleagues were welcoming and supportive, impressed by his knowledge. Others were more reserved, a few openly skeptical. He overheard whispers, heard he got the job through a connection with old Mrs. Vance. This initially stung, but Ethan resolved to let his work speak for itself. He dedicated himself to understanding Summit's unique operational challenges, spending extra hours poring over maintenance logs, talking to technicians in the hangars, with Riley's permission, and learning the intricacies of their mixed fleet of regional jets. He was reacting to this incredible, unexpected change by throwing himself into the work, determined to validate Eleanor's faith in him and prove to himself and everyone else that he belonged there. He was regrouping his professional life, piece by piece, rebuilding his confidence with each small success, each problem solved. The stakes were no longer just about paying rent. They were about building a meaningful career, contributing to a company whose values resonated with his own, and honoring the extraordinary act of kindness that had brought him here. His initial plan had been simply to survive unemployment. His new strategy was to excel and make a tangible difference at Summit Air. 6 months into his tenure at Summit Air, Ethan was assigned his first major solo project, to lead the pilot program for a new predictive maintenance software suite on their fleet of Embraer 175s. This was a significant step up. The software, if implemented successfully, promised to reduce unscheduled maintenance, improve dispatch reliability, and ultimately save the airline millions. It was also a substantial investment, and its success or failure would be highly visible. David Riley, the VP of Operations, made it clear, "This is your baby, Ethan. Make it work." The pressure was immense. Ethan assembled a small, cross-functional team, a data analyst, 2 senior mechanics, and a liaison from the IT department. His first challenge was internal skepticism. Many of the veteran mechanics were wary of new technology, comfortable with their established routines. "If it ain't broke, don't fix it," was a common refrain Ethan heard in the hangar. He spent weeks not in his office, but on the hangar floor, listening to their concerns, explaining the potential benefits in practical terms and demonstrating how the software could make their jobs easier and safer, not obsolete. He didn't just dictate, he collaborated, incorporating their feedback into the implementation plan. Then came the technical hurdles. Integrating the new software with Summit's existing IT infrastructure proved more complex than anticipated. Data migration was fraught with errors, and the initial sensor readings from the aircraft were noisy and unreliable. There were long nights spent troubleshooting with a vendor, rewriting code, and recalibrating sensors. Ethan's small apartment saw him less and less. The glow of his laptop screen in a quiet corner of the Summit offices became a familiar sight to the night security guards. One particularly challenging week, a critical bug in the software led to a false positive on a major engine component for 3 separate aircraft, nearly causing unnecessary and costly groundings. The pressure from upper management intensified. Whispers about Vance's pet project grew louder. Ethan felt the weight of expectation, the fear of failure pressing down on him. This was his dark night of the soul moment. He found himself staring out at the runway lights late one evening, questioning if he was up to the task. He thought of the alternative, the bleakness of unemployment, and then of Eleanor Vance's quiet confidence in him. He couldn't let her down. He couldn't let himself down. He rallied his team. They worked through the weekend, tracing the bug back to a flawed algorithm in how the software interpreted vibration data at specific altitudes. Ethan, drawing on his core engineering skills, worked side by side with the vendor's engineers to develop a patch. They reran simulations, tested, and retested. He also instituted a more rigorous manual cross-check protocol for any critical alerts flagged by the system during the initial rollout phase, a belt and suspenders approach that reassured the mechanics and management. As the pilot program neared its 3-month review period, the tide began to turn. The patched software started to deliver. It correctly identified a potential issue with a hydraulic actuator on one E-175 2 days before it would have likely failed, preventing a costly in-flight diversion. It streamlined the diagnostic process for several recurring minor issues, reducing aircraft turnaround times. The mechanics, initially skeptical, started to see its value, some even suggesting improvements. The final test was the presentation of the pilot program's results to Summit Air's executive committee, including Eleanor Vance, who, though retired, often attended significant review meetings. Ethan and his team prepared meticulously, compiling data, performance metrics, and testimonials from the maintenance crews. The escalation of challenges had pushed him to his limits, forcing him to draw on not just his technical skills, but also his leadership, communication, and resilience. The executive boardroom at Summit Air was intimidating. A long, polished mahogany table, state-of-the-art presentation screens, and the expectant faces of the airline's top leadership. David Riley gave Ethan an encouraging nod as he took his place at the podium. Eleanor Vance sat at the far end of the table, her expression calm and observant. Ethan began his presentation, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He walked the committee through the pilot program's objectives, the initial challenges, and the solutions his team had implemented. He didn't gloss over the difficulties, particularly the false positive incident, explaining the root cause and the corrective actions taken. He presented charts showing a clear upward trend in predictive accuracy, a measurable reduction in diagnostic time for key systems on the E-175 fleet, and projected cost savings that exceeded initial estimates. When he opened the floor for questions, the first came from the CFO, a notoriously tough questioner. Mr. Brooks, these are impressive projections, but how confident are you that these results are scalable across our entire E-175 fleet and potentially other aircraft types, given the initial teething problems? Ethan met his gaze directly. Very confident, sir. The teething problems, as you put it, were invaluable learning experiences. We've refined our implementation protocols, strengthened our data validation processes, and, crucially, we've gained the buy-in and active participation of our skilled maintenance teams. They are no longer just users of the system. They're contributors to its ongoing refinement. The patch for the algorithm issue has proven robust, and the architecture is designed for scalability. He then presented a phased rollout plan for the rest of the E175S and a preliminary assessment for adapting the system to their CRJ fleet. Eleanor Vance then spoke, her voice carrying quiet authority. Ethan, what was the most significant non-technical lesson you learned from this project? Ethan paused, considering that trust and communication are as critical as any algorithm, Mrs. Vance. Technology is a tool, but it's the people who make it effective. Listening to the concerns of the mechanics, understanding their experience, and working with them as partners, not just directing them, was key to overcoming resistance and ultimately making the project a success. A murmur of approval went around the table. After a few more technical questions, the CEO, Mark Olson, smiled. Ethan, thank you. This is exactly the kind of initiative and leadership Summit Air needs as we move forward. The committee approves the full rollout for the E175 fleet. Congratulations to you and your team. A wave of relief washed over Ethan, so profound it almost buckled his knees. He had done it. He had faced the challenge, navigated the complexities, and delivered. The project, his final test, was a success. In the months that followed, Ethan oversaw the successful expansion of the predictive maintenance program across all of Summit Air's Embraer 175S. The results continued to impress, leading to tangible improvements in operational efficiency and cost savings. He was promoted to Manager of Maintenance Systems Innovation, with a larger team and a broader mandate to explore and implement new technologies. The whispers about how he got his job faded, replaced by genuine respect for his competence, work ethic, and collaborative leadership style. He no longer felt like an outsider. He was an integral part of the Summit Air family. His financial worries were a distant memory. He was able to comfortably support himself, send regular help to his sister, and even start a small fund to help other out-of-work aerospace professionals access retraining programs, his own quiet way of paying forward the unexpected chance he'd received. He maintained a warm relationship with Eleanor Vance. They met for lunch occasionally, and she continued to offer sage advice and encouragement, not just about work, but about life. "You see, Ethan," she said one afternoon, looking out at the planes taking off from Denver International, "kindness is never wasted. It might not always come back to you in such a direct way as it did for you, but it always adds something good to the world." One evening, standing on the observation deck overlooking the bustling tarmac, Ethan watched a Summit Air E175 gracefully lift into the twilight sky. He thought back to that frantic day in the Minneapolis airport, the crushing despair of missing his flight, the feeling that his world had ended. He smiled. It hadn't been an ending, but an unlikely, unforeseen beginning. A simple act of helping a stranger, a choice made in a moment of empathy over ambition, had rerouted his life onto a path he could never have imagined. He was no longer just Ethan Brooks, the unemployed engineer. He was Ethan Brooks, a leader at Summit Air, making a difference in an industry he loved, all because he chose to help an elderly woman who, unbeknownst to him, was about to change his life. The future, once a source of anxiety, now stretched before him, bright with promise and possibility.